Alright, so today I want to tell you about 12 different types of substrate for your ball python. And essentially what the substrate is, it's the material that goes on the bottom of your snake enclosure that the snake crawls around on. Essentially it's the flooring material inside of your snake enclosure. And I actually made a list of 12 different substrates that are pretty much the most common for ball pythons. And each one has its pros and cons. And let me tell you, if you were to actually ask 10 different people, hey, what's your favorite substrate for ball pythons? You might get 10 different answers. It's that different between the different substrates. And I actually wanted to start with the number one substrate that I keep coming back to again and again, and that is the coconut husk block, which is kind of interesting. I actually pulled one out of the package here. If you've never seen one of these, this is kind of wild. Take a look at this. I actually pulled this one out. This is actually a Pro Coco coconut husk chip. I took all the packaging off and this is what you're left with. And I don't know how they compress this block, but if you were to actually expand this in water, it expands to like 3 or 4 times the volume, which is pretty crazy. I actually expand these in plastic totes and it expands so much that it's overflowing in the plastic tote, which is pretty awesome. You get a really compact block. And one of the things I found about this is it really absorbs the odors really well and it smells really good when you expand it. This is probably the number one thing. And kind of the thing I found about if you're actually using these, if you actually expand it, it seems like the time starts ticking the moment you expand it. So what I would actually do, if you're just using a little bit, I'd probably spray it with the sprayer and then just take a little bit off because it smells really good when you take it off the block. And for some reason, after it's been sitting and then dried and then you re-wet it, it doesn't smell like it smells when you first take it off the block. So what I would do is I just take it off just a little bit at a time, unless you have a lot of snakes. I can do like 5 or 6 tubs here in my collection, depending on the size of the tub with a full block like this. And with a hatchling rack, I can do like half the hatchling rack over here with a block like this. And the other thing I really like about this is it's really easy to spot clean. So you can actually go through and just take a little bit of mess here and there, and you don't have to completely change the substrate in the entire tub. And probably the number one advantage of using this type of substrate over anything else, especially here in my really dry Colorado climate, it is super dry here, almost like a desert, and this stuff holds humidity really well. I can actually put quite a bit of moisture on the bottom, and the bottom stays pretty hydrated on the bottom, and the top is dry. So the snake slides around a dry substrate on the top, and you have all the moisture on the bottom, and it slowly pretty much releases the perfect amount of humidity in the snake tubs over a period of like 3 or 4 days. I have to actually go through my whole collection every 3 or 4 days and add water to all my tubs because I think the humidity here is probably about 10% or lower. It's kind of crazy. So let me tell you, I absolutely love the coconut husk. Kind of the disadvantages of the coconut husk is it can be a little pricey. For a block like this, I think if you actually got it over on Amazon, they're selling for, I think it's like $25 to $30 or something like that shipped to your door. And this one is actually from Pro Coco. And if you actually go to prococo.com, you can order half a pallet or a full pallet actually shipped to your location. And I think I actually got, my last half pallet was like, I think it's like 100 blocks, and I paid a little over $1,000 for all that coconut husk, which is kind of crazy. You know, it's kind of hard to swallow right at first, but it lasts a really long time. And you're only paying about $11 a block when you buy it by the pallet. But sometimes the initial investment into something like that, you have to be breeding a lot of snakes and you have to be able to kind of justify the cost of that. I'd say even at $30, you know, buying it on Amazon, especially if you just have a few snakes and you go through it, you know, it will last quite a long time. I'd say usually I go through and replace my substrate maybe about once a month as far as completely changing it. And kind of the cool thing I really like about this is I use the excess, the leftover, the used substrate for landscaping material. I've actually had, and on occasion, I actually saved all my material from, you know, several tub cleanings through my whole collection, and I'll actually post it on Craigslist and sell it as landscaping material. And sometimes I can recoup half the cost of my initial investment selling it as landscaping material. And let me tell you, I give it to family and friends and put it all over my garden. It makes wonderful landscaping material. And pretty much the disadvantage that there's a couple disadvantages that I really don't like. One of them is if you actually get it really too wet, sometimes it can tend to mold a little bit, but I'd say as far as all the other substrates, it has probably a lower tendency to mold versus some of your other substrates. And the other thing I really don't like about it, which has been driving me crazy lately, is the fungus gnats. I don't know how I got gnats here in my collection. I've actually had fungus gnats that multiply like crazy in this stuff, and it seems like they go after the waste of the snake. When the snake goes to the bathroom, all the gnats just kind of multiply on the mixture of the coconut husk and the snake waste. You really have to stay on top of it. And I actually switched, at one point I actually switched from the coconut husk over to just paper, trying to get rid of those gnats. And it worked. I actually got rid of most of them. And I'm always hanging up fly paper, trying to get rid of those crazy gnats. But that's, you know, it's kind of a low price to pay for probably, I'd say, probably the #1 best substrate that you can use for ball pythons. So number 2, that was probably pretty long #1. So let me move on to number 2. Number 2 is actually the coconut husk fiber. So if you actually take a look at this block, so if you actually, these are really high quality blocks. If you look at the quality of these blocks, it's pretty much all the coconut husk chips all the way through the entire block. You can actually get a cheaper block. I've seen them over on Amazon where it's a lot less expensive. Sometimes they're even half the price. And essentially what it is it's half chip and half fiber, the coconut husk fiber. And I've actually gotten some of those cheap blocks before, and I got to the point where I was just throwing away the fiber, because essentially what the fiber is, it looks almost like, I guess you'd say it kind of looks like angel hair spaghetti, like really fine strands of the coconut husk. And I found that, especially in this dry climate, that the fibers don't really absorb that much humidity, and they don't really absorb that much of a smell as far as keeping the smell down here in my collection. I got to the point where I was just kind of throwing away the fiber. Although if you actually lived like in a tropical climate, you could probably get away with using the fiber because you wouldn't have to worry about the humidity. Or maybe if you're actually, you know, humidifying your whole room instead of the individual tubs, you could probably go with the fiber. But that's kind of one of the other less expensive options. Another one, I've actually seen the fiber mats. They make the mats that are like woven fibers. I've actually seen them for tortoises and stuff. You can actually cut them to size. I've never used one, but that would be kind of interesting for ball pythons. So number 3 on my list, you can actually use the coconut soil bedding. So you can actually get it like, there's a couple of brand names. There's like Eco Earth or Plantation Soil. I've actually used both of those, not for my ball pythons. I've used them for my tarantulas and my frogs. And let me tell you, the Eco Earth can get a little bit messy all over the place. It almost looks like dirt, but it's 100% coconut husk, which is like a really finely ground coconut husk. I've actually seen quite a few people use it on a regular basis. A lot of big breeders will use the Eco Earth. And I've actually used the Plantation Soil for some of my enclosures, for especially with my frog. I actually have a Pac-Man frog, and it seems like the Plantation Soil has a little bit of sand or something in it, kind of like a dirt filler or something, where actually what I do is I kind of squeeze out the top that flows to the top, and on the bottom it seems like there's a little bit of sand in the plantation soil. So I'm not sure the sand is really good for ball pythons. Most people will say stay away from sand, but I've seen a lot of people only use the Eco Earth. So the problem I've seen with the Eco Earth and the coconut husk chip, probably the other disadvantage is, especially if you have like a tub system like this, it seems like I'm always getting the substrate in my water cups, and I'm always going through the water, you know, pulling out all the water and changing the cups because of the substrate in the water, versus some of the other substrates that aren't really loose and fluffy like that. Sometimes you don't have that problem with the water. All right, so number 4 is shredded aspen, and I actually started with shredded aspen, and it's probably the least expensive options as far as kind of a shredded substrate for your ball pythons. The problem is when I was using shredded aspen, a lot of times when I was feeding my ball pythons, for whatever reason, they'd end up getting a little piece of wood chip in their mouth after feeding, and it seemed like I was always chasing my snakes around after feeding day and pulling out the little shredded chips of wood from their mouth. And it seems like with the coconut husk, I haven't had that problem at all. It seems like every now and then, very rarely will I ever have a ball python with a piece of that coconut husk chip in the mouth of the ball python. I've actually seen a lot of people go to the Eco Earth because it's a lot less risky as far as the ball python eating something during the feeding process, as far as passing it through their system. Although I should say I've actually been breeding ball pythons for like 6 years now, and I've used pretty much mostly the coconut husk chip in all my enclosures, and I've never really had a problem with a snake eating it and getting any kind of an impaction or anything like that. I've never had that kind of a problem. All right, so number 5 is newspaper, printed or unprinted. This is pretty popular. I've actually seen some big breeders go with pretty much 100% newspaper. If you're looking for something 100% free, you can use the printed newspaper. I've actually seen some people do it. Although I actually have a story about my rodents with printed newspaper. For a while, I was actually using just shredded office paper for all my rodents for the bedding. It was really awesome because at the time I was working at a day job, and we shredded all our paper, and we were actually just pretty much throwing it away. And I was taking these big bags of shredded paper, bringing them home and using them as bedding for my rodents, which was pretty much free bedding. But the problem is it didn't really hold enough of the odors down. I was always, chasing all my rodents. It was free bedding, but it was a lot more work. And then I kind of got this idea, hey, what if I actually used a newspaper and shredded it myself? And I actually started shredding newspaper and was using it for bedding for my rats and my mice. And the funny thing is with that newspaper with my mice, it was about a month after I started using newspaper that was shredded, my mice, they got like really sickly looking, and they definitely looked really scary. Like I was gonna actually lose my whole colony of mice. And I figured out it was the toxicity of the shredded newspaper. For some reason, I don't know if that was the ink on it or the certain newspaper that I'm using here in my area, but let me tell you, when it comes to printed newspaper, I will not use it for any animals after I saw what happened to my mice with shredded newspaper. So a lot of people actually use it, but I would definitely use it with caution. And essentially what I've gone to is, if I'm using newspaper, I'll actually get an unprinted newspaper. And I actually bought a roll of it. Take a look at this. This is a really super heavy roll of unprinted newspaper. I actually got this from Uline. Take a look at this big old beast. It's a massive whole roll of unprinted newspaper. I actually use this for my reticulated pythons, and essentially what I use it now mostly for is packing snakes. I don't use it a whole bunch anymore. And let me tell you, if you're actually using any kind of a paper product with your ball pythons, you're always kind of chasing the mess because it absorbs it holds no humidity at all. So it's, you're always struggling with the humidity. And every time they go to the bathroom on it, you're always chasing the tubs. And let me tell you, if I'm actually using paper substrate in my entire collection and I walk in the door, the whole room smells like snake pee. It smells really bad. As a matter of fact, it can smell up the whole house if I let it go for just a few days. Versus the coconut husk, it doesn't smell at all ever in my reptile room, which is pretty amazing. Essentially what it is, it's just like regular, it's really thin and flimsy newspaper. I just tore off a piece here, and it works fantastic for shipping snakes as far as a packing material. And I use it very rarely on as far as the substrate, just because of the maintenance involved. I use it on my reticulated python pretty much 100% of the time, but let me tell you, I'm always chasing that thing. He's going to the bathroom every few days, it seems like. But it's actually good to get the retic out and have him stretch a little bit. All right, so number 6 is paper towels. You can use pretty much any type of a paper towel. I actually use this type that you can actually split it into smaller sections, which I really like. And for a while, I was doing a lot of my hatchlings on paper towel when they would first hatch out of the eggs. And the problem I found with a lot of paper towels is you can get them wet and they hold a lot of humidity, but I found that they mold really fast, and it's a really weird looking mold. You get a lot of purples and greens and yellows. It's like a really colorful mold for some reason that grows on that paper towel, which I don't really like. I pretty much moved away from the paper towel, and I went pretty much 100% to the coconut husk chip for even my hatchlings. As a matter of fact, when I had a mite infestation in my whole collection, I went to 100% paper towels just because I was going through every single day, changing all the substrates, spraying everything down, trying to get rid of my mites. This is like when I first started about 5 years ago. And let me tell you, that was a nightmare. That's probably the only time that I would go back to a paper towel substrate, is if I had a problem with mites. All right, so number 7, this is kind of interesting. These are Reptisorb liners, if you've ever heard of that. So there's a product out there called Reptisorb. It's kind of an interesting material. Essentially what it is, it's an absorbent material that is precisely cut to fit these ARS tubs behind me. So it's like a paper substrate, except it has the hole cut out and it fits right in the bottom of the tub. And I used those for a while, but the problem is here in Colorado, I really struggled with the humidity and pretty much ditched all the newspapers, the paper towels, the Reptisorb, everything like that. I tried to humidify the room and it was like so much work just trying to fill the humidifier with gallons and gallons of water every day. I pretty much don't use any type of a paper substrate. But if you actually look up Reptisorb, it's kind of an interesting product and it's really easy. It just fits right in there. You don't have to worry about trying to cut it to size to your tubs if you're actually using tubs. So number 8 is cypress mulch. A lot of people have used cypress mulch. As a matter of fact, I actually looked at some early videos and some big breeders, and they pretty much used 100% cypress mulch. And I've actually heard some people have problems with mites with the cypress mulch. A lot of the cypress mulch is just kind of, you know, coming in from a hardware store, and you don't really know kind of the history of it. It's just coming from warehouses and stuff like that. It's not really like the kiln dried pet quality material that you would expect as far as being completely parasite free. All right, so number 9, this is kind of interesting. This is puppy pads. Puppy pads, I've actually seen some people where they're using puppy pads for their ball pythons. And essentially what it is, I actually had to look it up to figure out what they are. I've never actually used them myself, but what they are, they're like a layer of material, like a cloth material, and in between the layers they have kind of it's almost like a material that absorbs water and turns into a gel. So if you actually pour something on it, instead of being water on the bottom, it absorbs it and turns into kind of a semi-solid gel. I've seen some puppy pads where they'll have like a carbon impregnated material between the layers. So they'll have the carbon on top and then the gel on the bottom. And supposedly if the snake goes to the bathroom on the puppy pad, it'll absorb all the moisture and the top will stay dry and it'll completely eliminate all the smells. And they're pretty inexpensive. So I was actually kind of looking at it myself, but I think pretty much the number one problem with the puppy pads is if you actually lived in a tropical environment, it might work. But here in a dry Colorado climate, I can't really figure out how I would add humidity to the tub with the puppy pad. I'd be back to humidifying the whole room again with the puppy pad. So this is the thing that a lot of people use, but I just have never used the puppy pads. All right, so number 10 is artificial grass. I've seen some people use this, and it's like an astroturf grass that a lot of people use. And some people have had really good success with this. Essentially what it is, it's kind of like the astroturf you see like in people's yards, except it's made for reptiles, and it's really super soft, and you can cut it to size to your enclosure. And again, with this, I'm kind of back to the problem with the humidity and trying to keep enough humidity in the tub. But if you're in a tropical environment, I'd say, or if you had a humidifier in your room or something, and it could keep the humidity up to probably like 50 or 60% in your room, the AstroTurf might be a good option. And one of the things you have to really be careful of this is there's some artificial grasses that are toxic to your snake, so you have to make sure you get one that is a pet quality that's not toxic. So number 11, a lot of people do this. There's actually a bioactive substrate that some people use. And I've actually dabbled with this a little bit myself with ball pythons, and I can't really get it to work, but I actually use it for my crested geckos. And essentially what it is, it's a substrate that mimics the forest floor. So you have a whole bunch of organic material in the bottom, and then you add a whole bunch of critters to that substrate. So actually what I did is I put like some coconut, kind of like the eco earth in there, and some sphagnum moss, and crumbled up some leaves and a bunch of stuff like that. And then I put in some isopods and some springtails in there. And essentially what it does is the isopods and springtails and all the little microorganisms kind of keep refreshing and renewing the substrate, and you never have to replace it. So with my crested geckos, I actually have a bioactive substrate in there. And if you actually open it, I haven't changed it for like a year and a half. You actually open it up and take a whiff whiff of that enclosure and it smells like the floor of a forest. It is pretty amazing. And I think if you actually did it with ball pythons, you need a really big enclosure. That should be a little bit challenging, and I know ball pythons can be a little bit more messy than something smaller like that, but that is an option. I've actually seen some people make really big bioactive enclosures with a really small ball python, and it seems like it works really well. All right, so number 12, bark chips like Reptibark. I've actually seen quite a few people using Reptibark, and I'd say it's probably one of the ones that is probably the most contested. A lot of people love it, a lot of people hate it. As a matter of fact, if you go to a lot of care sheets, and a lot of care sheets will actually say that you can use Reptibark for ball pythons. And kind of one of the problems that I've seen as far as some of the critical reviews of Reptibark, a lot of people say that it doesn't really hold a lot of moisture compared to some of your coconut husk products, and sometimes it can be a little harder to spot clean on the Reptibark. But I'd say you can definitely use some kind of bark product. One thing you kind of want to stay away from is you don't want to use any type of cedar or any type of pine in your enclosure because it can be toxic for your snakes. So that is pretty much it. 12 different substrates that you can use for your ball python. A lot of people will go back and forth. Some people will actually mix it and use a little bit of one, a little bit of another. Some people will say they'll actually use a little bit of the bark, mix it with eco earth and some other stuff, and kind of mix it up that way to add a little bit more moisture retention to some of your other products. So that is pretty much it. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next video.